G'day, Corbinate2000 here. I'm back with another Borderlands 3 video for you guys, as today I'm going to be going over Amarchy. Amarchy is a Tediore chucking Anarchy Amara build, and it uses the Anarchy, as I've mentioned, as a Tediore chucker. And the reason this works is because the Anarchy is working in a way where you can reload manually by, shooting once and then reloading, and you can build up stacks with the Anarchy. You used to not be able to do that. You used to have to either kill an enemy or empty your magazine completely to build up stacks for the Anarchy. But now you can just reload whenever you want and build up stacks that way, and that allows it to work as a Tediore chucker, since a Tediore chucker requires you to basically fire once and then throw the gun to give it the most amount of damage, as the more ammo you have in a Tediore weapon when you reload, the more damage its reload explosion does. And now that the Anarchy is the strongest Tediore weapon in the game, so put two and two together, you get a really powerful Tediore chucker. And while someone like Mose might be able to get better mileage out of this because she can spec into a bunch of splash damage and magazine size skills, Amara has access to a bunch of really powerful anointments, and also is just really powerful in herself, as she can boost elemental damage, and also has a bunch of action skills that can boost the damage of this by a lot, like Ties That Bind. However, for the purpose of this video, I did not use Ties That Bind, and instead used Phase Cast, just to show that you do not need Ties That Bind for this build. Ties That Bind is completely optional. Phase Cast is actually more fun in my opinion, and who wants to use Ties That Bind all the time? It's a broken skill, and I'm not going to be surprised if it gets nerfed in the future. Anyway, timestamps can be found in the description for this video if you want to jump into different parts of this build. And with that out of the way, let's just jump right into it. So starting with the gear, I'll quickly go over each of the gear just briefly, so if you just want to see what I'm actually using and don't care about why I'm using it and what specific things are important, then you feel free to go. So basically, for this video, I'm using just a corrosive Anarchy with the Phase Cast weapon damage anointment. And the Anarchy has a very specific part that makes it work as a Tediore reloader, which is the homing module, and you need to have this part for an Anarchy. It's for shield. I'm using an old god with the action skill and gain 50% radiation damage, and this old god is radiation damage, spec for radiation damage as well. Alternatively, any old god that boosts elemental damage, ideally one that matches the element of your Anarchy, is best with a right anointment. As for the grenade, I'm using a hex grenade with bonus action skill and bonus shock damage. I'm using a cut burst launch pad that gives me shock resistant, radiation damage, and magazine size. And I'm using a phase Zerker that's giving me splash damage, action skill cooldown rate, and action skill damage. So going into more detail, for the Anarchy, as I've mentioned, the biggest part that's important for this weapon to work as a Tediore reloader is the homing module. When you throw a Anarchy with the homing module, the weapon will home in on nearby enemies, so you can throw it and then it will seek out a nearby target, and that makes it work really, really well as a Tediore reloader. It's kind of the thing that makes it work, because without that part, you're just yeeting the gun, or you're getting it to land and turn into a turret, and that's not what you want. You want this thing to be able to explode on impact and do a lot of damage to enemies, and a homing module is the best bet for that. As for the elements, you really want elemental variants of an Anarchy. Amara is spec'd into elemental damage, and elemental damage is king in Borderlands, as matching elements is a really important part. The elements I recommend prioritizing are radiation and corrosive as the absolute most important ones. Radiation is the best element in the game in my opinion, as it gives you bonus damage against shock. It's neutral against red bars, which is flesh. It's not as good against armor, but armor you don't really come across often enough for you to really carry around a corrosive weapon as a main all the time. And it's just the best. Corrosive is the second best because the Maliwan takedown and the Guardian takedown have a lot of armored bosses, and since they have a lot of health, you want a corrosive weapon to take them out. As you can see, as I've mentioned, I'm using a corrosive Anarchy, mostly because it's the only one I had access to. And unfortunately, even then, I'm able to use this against a corrosive Anarchy against armor, which destroys, shields, which it's actually able to eat through because of the action skill end elements on my grenade and shield, and it's able to also go through health bars really good. Obviously a fire or shock one would work better against shields and flesh, but this proves that, as the footage might be showing hopefully, you don't need to match elements all the time, and you just match the element that needs to be matched the most. And yeah, that's the great thing about the Anarchy. You can use the Anarchy as a typical weapon, so if you want to use the Anarchy as like, an actual typical gun, so shoot an enemy and stuff, the big thing you want is to look for the maximum amount of pellets you can have. The one I have has times 12, times 18 or times 20 would be a best bet. But as a Tediore chucker, you're just mostly looking for base damage and magazine size. Those are the two big things. But if you can't go for a specific like God Roll Anarchy, just make sure it has the homing module and has a right element and a good anointment. As for the anointments you want on it, I'm using the phase cast anointment, but the 300 phase slam anointment, 100 action skill and anointment, 200 splash, 150% radiation while under 50% health anointment, and the 300% weapon damage while enemies are above 90% health anointment all work with boosting the reload damage of an Anarchy. The best ones I recommend getting are the phase cast and phase slam ones, since they have really good damage. The 200 splash is also going to be your absolute best, is probably going to be your best anointment, because you're getting 200% bonus damage from it, and you're able to use ties that bind, as you'll be able to fake grasp and trigger the action skill and anointment on demand, and you'll be able to use it with ties that bind, which is inherently broken. But as I've mentioned, not using ties that bind for this build. Don't need it. And yeah, that's the big thing with the Anarchy. As for the shield, Old God, you're using an Old God because it gives you the most damage. And the reason we have action skill and bonus elemental anointments on both our shield and grenade is because these action skill and elements actually apply to the Tediore reload explosion, which is really, really important, because that allows us to give our reloads even more damage, and gives us even different elements to use. And that can help out if you get a really shitty element like corrosive and try use it on shields or health, as you can put on a radiation and shock, and that'll help out with taking shields down as well. Not ideal, but it's still better than nothing. And you, again, for the Old God, you want to make sure you have a Old God that's matching the element of your Anarchy. So ideally I should probably be carrying around a corrosive Anarchy, but I've got a radiation one that's giving me bonus radiation damage, so that's pretty good as well. As you can see, it's actually level 57, and yeah, it was still doing well enough for me. I was using it mostly for damage. Grenade, any grenade is perfectly fine, just the anointment's the main thing you want. Cut Purse Launchpad. Reason we're using a Cut Purse Launchpad and nothing else is because the biggest problem with the Anarchy and any Tediore chucking build period is ammo consumption. You go through ammo very, very quickly, and with the Anarchy you can't just simply switch to a face puncher with a Cut Purse artifact of any kind and get ammo back, because you'll lose stacks with your Anarchy. And the thing is, with the Anarchy, you want to keep those stacks up. You want to keep yourself having the maximum amount of stacks. So a Cut Purse Launchpad will allow you to slam the ground. It will launch out homing missiles that, when they hit, they count as melee attacks for whatever reason, and can give you ammo back thanks to the Cut Purse effect. As for the bonus effects on it, magazine size, elemental damage, action skill cooldown rate, splash damage, those are all going to be the best things for you, because they'll boost damage, or boost usefulness, and it's just really good things. But the big thing is make sure you've got Cut Purse Launchpad, because that's going to give you ammo and allow you to keep throwing. Class mod, it was Phase Zerker. Using Phase Zerker mostly because it's just kind of the best in slot, really. You get great action skill cooldown rate, which is very important, because we want to be able to spam our action skill all the time to be able to give ourselves the most amount of damage with our Anarchy and our throws. The skills on it don't really matter, though. If you want, prioritize getting as many points into Anima, because status effect damage is actually pretty good with an Anarchy on a reload if you can get it to proc. If you get a dot to happen on an enemy, because each reload's doing millions upon millions of damage, the dot's going to be hitting pretty hard, so Anima can boost that damage more. But you don't need to worry about the skills on it. And the things you want to be looking for are splash damage, action skill cooldown rate. Basically everything I mentioned with the Cutpurse Launchpad, you'll want to apply that for the bonus stats on the Phase Zerker. Action skill damage is nice if you're using ties that bind, but as I mentioned, we're not using that, so that bit is kind of unnecessary. And yeah, that's pretty much all the gear. Right, moving on to the skills, I'll quickly hover over each of the trees, so feel free to pause and screenshot each tree if you wanted to keep them for future reference. So as you can see, I primarily spec'd into the orange tree, a little bit of the green tree, and then a big chunk in the blue tree. So yeah, starting with the blue tree, we've got 3 points into fast hands, increased reload speed, weapon swap speed, and mode switch speed. Reload speed's a big thing because the faster we can reload, the more quicker we can chuck out Anarchies and, you know, quicker reloads, quicker DPS. 5 points into do harm. Every stack of rush you consume, you gain increased action skill damage. This is mostly here to, you know, because none of the other skills in the top, no other skills really help us with a Tediore chucking build, and this is really nice to have if you plan on using ties that bind, since more action skill damage, the more damage ties that binds do. So yeah, that's really handy to have. But as I've mentioned many times, not using ties that bind just to show off you don't need it. Alacrity maxed out, increases reload speed for every rush stack you have. Again, as I mentioned, reload speed is really good for a Tediore reloading build, because the more reload speed you have, the quicker you can chuck out, you know, your Tediores, which is handy. 5 points in the Restless, increased action skill cooldown rate, pretty self-explanatory. Over here, we'll grab Soul Sap. Portion of all damage dealt by Amara's action skill is returned to her nearby allies as health. Pretty fucking good. You know, a little bit of health steal, life steal is not bad. Health healing shit, that's the word. Anyway, next we've got Ascendant. All action skill augments gain increased effects. Pretty self-explanatory. The action skill I'm using is Deliverance. Basically, it's a phase cast, except it's when you damage something, when you damage an enemy, it releases these elemental orbs that can hit enemies and do the elemental damage. I use this over the standard phase cast because it has this exact same cooldown rate, and it looks cooler, because why not? Next we've got Laid Bare. Enemies take increased damage from all sources for a few seconds after being damaged by your action skill. More damage, always good. Wrath, you gain increased gun damage and the effect is doubled whenever you activate your action skill. More gun damage, this is good. 1 point into Remnant. Whenever you kill an enemy with a gun or action skill, you create a homing projectile that seeks out enemies, and this homing projectile adds any extra overkill damage from your weapon, your kills, into the orb, and adds it to the orb. So basically, when you throw a fully stacked Anarchy with everything going, you can hit for millions of damage. It'll kill an enemy instantly. A homing orb will go out and it will do a lot of damage. If you're using ties that bind, the orb will come out of an enemy that dies via ties that bind, and the orb will hit for stupid amounts of damage. So yeah, but the orb is still very handy to have even when not using ties that bind. Next we've got Avatar. This allows you to use your action skill twice. It gives you an extra 10 rush stacks, which is pretty cool. Being able to use your action skill twice, especially when using the phase cast or phase slam action skills, very very handy for keeping your rush stacks up, and B, your anointment action skill and anointments up, because you'll be able to, you know, keep the damage up. Very handy to have. Onto the orange tree, we've got 5 points into Infusion, converts a portion of our weapon's damage into our action skill element. This is here mostly to go down the skill tree because nothing else is really necessary, and if you've got a shitty element on an Anarchy, like Corrosive, and you want to use it for anything other than armor, this is really handy to have, because the Anarchy, while I'm using it as a Tediore chucker, still works very well as a conventional weapon, and you'd be stupid not to use it as a conventional weapon from time to time, because it's pretty good. Next we've got 3 points into steady hand, you gain increased weapon handling and accuracy, self-explanatory. I've got 2 points into Anima. I'm getting in my class mods boosting Anima by 3 points, but we've got 2 points here. Basically, you gain increased status effect damage and status effect duration. Sorry about that. This is nice to have, mostly because if your Anarchy triggers a dot on an enemy and they don't die, the dot's going to do quite a bit of damage. And it's pretty good to have. Just nice little extra bonus damage. Tempest, you get increased elemental damage and shock damage is increasing further. Self-explanatory. Dread, you gain increased gun damage for a few seconds after grabbing an enemy, and whenever a player kills a grasped enemy, your weapon is instantly reloaded. If you're using ties that bind, the damage is nice, and while instantly reloading might seem like an odd thing to have for a Tediore reloading build, if you happen to use the Anarchy as an actual gun and kill someone by shooting them, having it instantly reload so you can just shoot once and get the maximum reload damage you can have. Not a bad thing to have, and it's not that annoying to have really. Deep Well increases the magazine size of elemental weapons. Bigger the mag size, the more reload damage we can do with a Tediore weapon. Self-explanatory. Indiscriminate, bullets that damaged enemy have a chance to ricochet and deal damage to nearby enemies. Pretty handy to have, and the effects are increased when you shoot a phase grasp enemy. This is just nice to have, just to go down the skill tree. To grab the one skill that we really need in this tree, Sustainment. You gain lifesteal whenever you deal elemental damage with your weapon. 1 point here is all you need because you do so much damage. 4% of a million damage when your health is only in the tens of thousands is going to be enough to heal you instantly. Class mods giving us 2 points into Conflux, but that's not part of our build. Lastly, for the green tree, we've got 3 points into personal space. You gain bonus damage the closer you are to enemies. This is just nice to have, just, if you're using the Anarchy as a conventional weapon, which sometimes you might want to do. You might want to mix things up. 2 points into clarity to go down the skill tree. This just gives you health regen the lower your health is, which is nice to have. I prefer the little bit of health regen over the little bit of extra max health. I just personally prefer that. And lastly, we've got 5 points into Arms Deal. This increases splash damage and we take reduced splash damage. Splash damage is very good to have because a Tediore reload, it explodes when it hits an enemy and that is splash damage. So being able to boost splash damage, very nice to have. It's just a nice little bonus. So yeah, and a reason I wanted to grab 5 points here is to be able to give myself access to Fracture. Yeah, mostly get myself access to Fracture because if you have a 300 phase slam Anarchy, you want to use Fracture because it has the exact same cooldown rate as phase cast. You're not really using this action skill for damage or doing anything, you're using it to purely proc anointment, and if you have a phase slam anointment Anarchy, Fracture is essentially the same as using phase cast, except you've got an anointment that does 50% more damage. Also, if you want to use ties that bind, you have access to that. So I just wanted to have plenty of options to be able to bounce around depending on what gear I have access to. As for the Mayhem modifiers, I use Speed Demon, Mob Mentality, Drone Ranger, and Not the Face. Mob Mentality I could change out for the Healy Avenger, but I spent already about an hour re-rolling these specific modifiers, so I didn't want to do that. Speed Demon gives us bonus movement speed whenever we kill an enemy, very nice to have. Mob Mentality just increases the damage and fire rate enemies have when they're near each other, not really a big issue. Drone Ranger allows enemies to spawn with a healing drone that supports them and it basically heals them. The healing from these drones is so minuscule that it doesn't really change things at all. And Not the Face, critical hit damage is reduced by 75%. Now, Tediore reloads can actually do critical hits, and when they do, they can be very, very powerful, but you don't need to, and most of the time you won't be hitting critical hits. So I found that Not the Face was a really good option here because we're not worried about hitting critical hits. We're just here to, it's just fire, throw, and just kill. you don't need to worry about hitting critical hits. So having a modifier that doesn't make us have to change our playstyle, like, you know, the buddy system where you have to kill a drone that's making an enemy completely immune to damage, with a Tediore throwing weapon that doesn't always home in on the buddy systems, can be very annoying. So not the Face's best option. As I mentioned, the Healy Avenger would probably be best for the medium side, as that just creates a little drone thing that slowly makes its way to near enemies and can potentially fully heal them if it touches them. It doesn't really matter that much, but that would probably be your best bet. But other than that, mob mentality is perfectly fine. And yeah, that's it. That's everything about this build covered. So basically, the way to play this build is pretty simple. You want to basically just, you know, trigger your action skill, shoot the gun once, and then start reloading, and, you know, just keep going. Triggering your action skill, throw and reload. And because you've got a homing module on your Anarchy, you can stand far-ish back away. So if you're worried about, so you don't need to be in the middle of everything. So if you're worried about getting killed because enemies are swarming you, just back up and, you know, just snipe with it. You can just, you know, just yeet. Just start yeeting away. It's pretty fun and it's pretty good. Your biggest hurdles are going to be going into fight for your life when you're on low on ammo, because using a Tediore reloads, that's the biggest source of your damage. So if you go into fight for your life, that can be potentially a really bad thing, and that's a really annoying thing, specifically in the takedowns, as enemies have a lot of health, and if you can't kill an enemy and you run out of ammo, then yeah, you're pretty screwed. And it's not like you can just easily switch to a weapon that gives you a second wind weapon, because if you do that, you have to switch back to Anarchy and then restack it up again. Yeah, build it stacks up all over again, which is not something you want to do. But yeah, it's pretty fun, and as I've mentioned, you don't need Ties That Bind for this build. It works perfectly fine without it. However, if you want best results, Ties That Bind, it's simply the best action skill Amara has currently. So if you have something, an anointment that works with Ties That Bind, use that, because you're honestly your best bet. But if you don't want to conform to the norm and use Ties That Bind, Phase Cast and Phase Slam, perfectly fine. Hell, you could even just have an, you know, 200 splash anointed Anarchy and not use Ties That Bind at all. You could just use the standard Phase Grasp because it has a good cooldown rate. Ties That Bind, not needed for this build. Would recommend though, because it is powerful. And yeah, that wraps up for this build. If you enjoyed it, remember to hit that like button, subscribe to my channel if you want to see more, and I'll talk to you guys later.